The following interview was conducted as part of the Price of Freedom project by the Madison County Military Heritage Commission to inform and enlighten young people and the community as a whole about the sacrifices made by those in the military on battlefields around the world. We wish to thank the Huntsville School System and the Lehigh Broadcast Center for their help in presenting this military heritage program. Hello, I'm Tom Kennemer. Welcome to our program. Today we'll be talking with U.S. Army veteran Leonard Robinson. Leonard received 2 Bronze Star with Valor Awards for his gallantry in action while serving in the infantry in Vietnam in 1969. Leonard, a sergeant at the time, was also the recipient of 2 Purple Hearts for wounds he suffered while serving in country. He was inducted into the Hall of Heroes in 2009 and presently serves on the board of directors for the Madison County Military Heritage Commission. Leonard, it's a pleasure to see you, sir, and good to have you on our program. Thank you for agreeing to do our Price of Freedom interviews. First of all, before we get into the questions regarding your military service, tell us a little about yourself. Where are you originally from?
Guthrie, Oklahoma was where I was born and raised. And
Okie, you're an Okie.
Yes, well, no, because I stayed there. Well, I am now, you're correct.
Right.
But anyway, I went to grade school there in a 2-room country school for the 1st through the 8th grade, and then moved to the city schools and completed high school in 1966.
Tell us a little about your family. You have several brothers and sisters?
I have one sister. My father was in World War II. He was in the engineering combat battalion and was landed on D-Day and went through Europe from France, Belgium, and into Germany, building bridges.
Big influence in your life as well. Right?
Yes, he was. He didn't speak very much about all of his activities, but I recently found a couple of books that were written by men who served with him, and it's really enlightened me and made me more appreciative of all the sacrifices he made in that time.
Leonard, you mentioned grade school, and that was also influential. Tell us about how that influenced your career.
Well, every Friday we would start the day with about an hour of singing songs, and sometimes we'd have newsreel clips, and a lot of those involved activities in World War II. Like one of our favorites was showing landings on aircraft carrier during World War II, and after you'd seen it a couple of times, then you'd start thinking, "Oh no, look out, Joe! You're gonna crash." So,
kind of a patriotic theme, and
it was totally that type of theme, and we sang different patriotic songs. Of course, one of my favorite songs that we sang at the time was the Marine Corps hymn, and it
good. That's a good song, right?
But it didn't take effect, so I joined the Army instead.
Didn't work on you, huh? Okay. When did you decide to go into the Army, and did you volunteer, or were you drafted?
I did volunteer. It was after my freshman year in college, and at Oklahoma State University, and they sent me a letter and said, "Don't come back." My grades, I am fond to say that the first semester I had a C average, and the second semester I learned to play tennis, and so my grades were indicative of that, and so I said, this is a good excuse to join the Army, because I wanted to find out what war was like.
Right. Well, where did you go to basic, and how was boot camp for you?
Well, it was different than I had imagined. I went to Fort Polk, Louisiana in July, and so I was anticipating it being very, very, very hot, and it was the first week.
Now this was, Leonard, this was in 1968, is that right?
1967.
Oh, 67, okay.
Right, and it was hot the first week, and then it started raining, and it basically cooled down, was fairly pleasant, and but it was interesting time. And then from there I went to Fort Gordon, Georgia for my advanced infantry training, and which was also preparatory for going to jump school or for parachute training, and I got to do that at the end of 1967 in December, the week after Christmas. I reported to Fort Benning for parachute training.
So that's what you wanted to do. You wanted to be an infantryman, right? And you know, a paratrooper, right?
Yes, that's what I enlisted for. My cousin had volunteered for the draft, and he'd gone through basic, and then he went to jump school and was stationed with the 101st at Fort Campbell. And he said, we were home on leave at the same time, or it was before I joined. He was home on leave, and he said, yeah, if you join, that's what you want to do, airborne infantry. Yeah. So I talked with the recruiter, and I was saying I was ready to join. He said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, airborne infantry. And he dropped his pen on the table, and he stepped back in his chair, and he said, you know, that's pretty difficult. And I said, yeah, that's what I want to do. You know. And so he started writing somewhat reluctantly. And then he said, well, how soon do you want to go? And I said, how soon can I go? And he said, well, we got a train leaving this afternoon. I said, how about Monday? And,
now, from there, Leonard, you went to Vietnam, or were you stationed somewhere else before you went to Vietnam?
Well, I really, after jump school at Fort Benning, I stayed there for NCO school and became a sergeant. Right. And then at the end of that training at Fort Benning, we went on OJT, on-the-job training, to various units. And so I went to Fort Lewis, Washington, to be with an AIT company, Advanced Infantry Training Company.
Additional training.
Right.
Sure.
And, well, I was a sergeant, so got to be the squad leader in the training unit. And then after that, I had leave and went to Vietnam. So basically the first year I was in the Army was all training. And it was, I needed that much before I went to Vietnam too.
Now, before we get into your stay in Vietnam, talk a little more about being away from home while you're in the military. How did it affect your family? And were you married at that time?
I wasn't married, so it was pretty good. And of course, my parents were married when my dad was in World War II, so my mother was kind of had experienced things of being away. But the first year I was in, I was home for Christmas, and the second year I was in Vietnam, and then the third year I was at Fort Benning, so I was able to get home the week after Christmas, and so I didn't miss too much of the holidays. I did miss Thanksgiving each year, and it was that was part of it, so you didn't really dwell on that. And I was able in all my training to be able to call home at least once a week. So
that was important.
That made it less of a problem to be separated at a holiday time.
Leonard, how long was the length of the tour in the Army when you went to Vietnam? Each tour was like, what, 9 months or a year? Or
I was scheduled for a year, but my discharge papers say that I was in Vietnam for 11 months and 28 days. That's kind of 2 days short of a year. But excuse me, it seemed like a year to me.
Yeah. I can imagine. Now, I'm sure you formed lasting friendships in the service. Do you still stay in contact with any of your friends?
It's strange, and when we were going over the questions that you were going to ask, that one really struck me, that because some of the good friends I had in the service were killed in Vietnam.
Didn't come back. Right.
And so the people that I served with in Vietnam, I have not kept in contact with. And I've talked to other combat veterans who had similar stories, that they didn't really keep in touch with the folks. So no, I really haven't. Even though when you're in the situation of being in combat, excuse me, you do depend on each other and watch for each other and everything. But I guess there's some of the release of you're coming back to the world, as we called it, then, and it was a different place. You didn't have to be on your guard all the time.
Right.
So those, depending on others like that, tended to wane and not keep in contact.
Right. When you had some free time, however little that was, what did you do for relaxation? Do you have a chance to see any movies or anything like that?
In
Vietnam.
In Vietnam, not really. We didn't. When I went on R&R, I went to the rest and relaxation to Hawaii, and I did go to the movies there. I saw the new movie out at that time was Bullet with Steve McQueen.
Yeah.
I saw it a couple of times, 2 or 3 times.
The
I
race
guess.
scenes and so forth.
Yeah.
Now, how long was R&R? That's like a week, or is it?
It was a week. It almost became longer because the last night that we were there, I wasn't married, and so it was just a group of the guys that had gone on R&R. We stayed out a little bit late, and we overslept the next morning, so we had a call, and they said, you need to get to the airport now. So,
or you'll be left on this beautiful island.
Right.
Leonard, didn't have email, or you couldn't text anyone back then, but you were able to get regular mail, and you mentioned just a little bit earlier, from time to time. How often was that, and how long did it normally take to get a letter from home?
It didn't seem long. I think it was, excuse me, 3 or 4 days that the letter took to get there. And so we had, my parents were real good about, they kind of alternated day after day. They would write something. So whenever we got resupplied out in the field, then they would have mail. So I'd have 2 or 3 letters to read when.
Did you get fruit cakes and cookies? I mean, that was always very popular. You didn't have to share it with all the guys.
My real story was when I was in high school. One of my friends and his parents started a little drive-in hamburger joint, and so I used to spend a lot of time there. And I would get a tea burger. It was called. It was one of my favorites.
Yeah.
And about halfway through my tour, I received a package from them, and they sent me a hamburger, fries, and a cup for Coke, but they weren't quite edible by the time they got there.
So you gave it to the other guys to see if they wanted to eat it, right?
Nobody cared for it.
But mail call, of course, was always a popular time during a war, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
It made that connection. It's not like Skyping or something, but at that time, that was about as good as it got.
It always felt good. Of course, no cell phones at that time, but did you occasionally get to talk on the phone, or when you went back to a more unremote place, or whatever?
No, I was near a place one time, but I never took advantage of it, and that was part of the reason I went to Hawaii on R&R, was so I could call and talk with my family. So we did then, and of course I called collect.
Of course. Right.
And my dad said the next month after I'd called, several times from Hawaii, the phone company called him and said, "How do you plan to pay for this bill?" Because it was so much larger than the normal.
Sure. Yeah.
bill.
Leonard, what is your favorite memory from serving in Vietnam and the Army?
Well, I really did enjoy my time in the Army. It's hard to say that you enjoyed combat, but the times that you weren't in actual the armed conflict there, you had a chance to enjoy. Sitting around talking to other people, and then the beauty of the country was always stuck in my mind. When our unit moved up north of Hue, and we were out in the mountainous areas, and it was.
Was that like in the northern part, like Da Nang, up in that area?
It was further north than that.
I see.
Our base camp was between Hue and Quang Tri, and so. Just slightly to the north and west of our base camp was Quezon that everyone's heard of. I never got there, but directly west was the Oshaw Valley, and so that was where I was wounded the second time.
I see.
And,
Yeah, we'll get to that in a little. What company or outfit were you attached to while in
I
Vietnam?
was in Bravo Company of the 3rd of the 187th, 100 of the 101st Airborne Division, and there's interesting story tied with that that we can do later on. With the,
okay. All right. You were awarded 2 Bronze Stars while in Vietnam. Tell us about the battles or combat action that led to you receiving these Valor Awards.
Well, the first one was in September of 1968, and I'd been in country a couple of months at that time, and we had been on a fire support base securing it, and then we got a call that another unit was in some very fierce fighting near Tay Ninh City, and we were choppered over to that area, and we were there on the ground for an hour or two and nothing, and then we started receiving heavy fire, and my platoon sergeant grabbed my squad and we moved out onto a trail to try to flank the enemy, and there was a burst of shots coming down the trail, and the platoon sergeant and 2 other people in front of me were wounded, and the rest of us hit the ground, and I thought, man, they know where I am. They see me. If I move, they're going to shoot me. And then I said, well, I thought I heard the platoon sergeant call out that he was hit, and he was laying in front of me, and I thought, well, I got to go check on him. And so I cautiously crawled forward, and I grabbed his arm to see if he was all right, and I couldn't feel any pulse. And then I turned him over, and I realized he was had been mortally wounded and was dead. And so I grabbed him and pulled him back off the trail, back toward the company commander's area. And the one thing that kept going through my mind was in our training when we came in country that they said the 101st doesn't leave any of their fallen soldiers on the battlefield. So that was going through my mind too, that I needed to pull him back. And as after I pulled him back, I was on my hands and knees talking with the company commander. He was asking questions about if everybody was off the trail, and as I said, yes, I guess there was an explosion. I don't remember hearing anything, but what I remember was flipping over in the air. It was like slow motion, and some of the TV programs after I got out of the Army would show people being hurt in some way, and that it was in slow motion. And I said, that's exactly how I felt. Yeah. And then there was the company commander saying, move on back, you're not hit that badly. And
you were wounded in the leg?
In the leg, and I looked in at my leg and I didn't see any blood, and I said, well, it felt like a cramp, so yeah, I'm not hit that bad. And so another person and I grabbed the platoon sergeant to pull him back, and as we were moving, I said, oh, that wasn't a cramp, there's something going on. So the other person, after we pulled his body back, the other guy helping me cut off my pants leg, and there was a little trickle of blood coming down from the wound, and so he bandaged it, and medevac came in and took me back to the 12th Back Hospital in Cu Chi. Yeah.
How long were you out of action, or before you could get back to your unit?
It was about 4 weeks before I returned to the unit, and that was the time when you go back out in the field and you say,
Wow.
I got
Yeah.
wounded, and they could do that again. So if my head was itching, I wouldn't take my helmet off. I'd just raise it up enough to scratch my head and everything. Then I finally got used to being back out in the field, and so I could take it off. And that's when I started thinking that they know where I am. There's no need for me to worry about. I'll be vigilant and see if I see them, but I'm not going to. I can't worry about if they're out there or not. I just believe they're out there. If they get ready to shoot me, they'll shoot me. But I got to go on and do the other things.
What you got to do.
Yeah.
Tell us about the experience for the second Bronze Star that you received. Talk about that experience.
It was somewhat the same. We were conducting a new operation into the Oshaw Valley, and our company was going to help a unit that had been tied down. It was really a small unit, like some long-range reconnaissance patrol folks had gone out, and so our platoon was going to be first, and so the platoon leader and the guys with him, and then I can't remember the order of the squads, but anyway, we were on about 4 helicopters, and the first helicopter that went in with platoon leader received fire and had to make a crash landing on the LZ there and the landing zone.
Right.
Yeah. And the second helicopter then came in, and they were also shot down. So the helicopter I was on, the pilot said, "We're not going to land there. We're going down. There's a lower landing zone down, and we'll land you there." So the rest of the company, rest of our platoon, and then the remainder of the company came down to the lower landing zone, and then other companies from our battalion came in, and we set up a defensive perimeter and getting ready to move to the upper LZ to relieve them.
Right.
And I guess that was about 3 days later we were going to move up, and so as we started moving up, we received a lot of fire, and so I was directing fire for my squad, telling them where to shoot and everything. And as we moved a little further, I received some shrapnel in my arm, in the left arm, and the medic came up and I said, "Now move on back. We're going to have to move back a little bit here." And we didn't really move back, but I did because after just a couple of minutes, I looked down. My arm was coated with blood coming down, so I was losing a good bit of blood, and so I moved back. We had pretty well gotten across our objective by that time, so I went back to where the medic was, and he put a bandage on and tagged me, and I walked back down the trail, and I remember going by the company commander, and I'd been scheduled to go to an in-country R&R in a couple of days after that, and he said, "Well, I guess you know that you're not going to be able to go on your R&R now."
Go to the hospital.
Yeah, gone. So,
missed out on that.
But
yeah, go ahead.
So then I was I finally got back to the 95th evacuation hospital, and I was in bed. My bed was next to an older sergeant who had been in Korea, and he had been with the 187th Parachute Infantry Regiment, the Rakkasans in Korea.
Right.
And so my unit was the carryover of that unit in the 101st. So we got to talk a good bit, and when the doctor came in to release me, the sergeant said, "You need to give him a break, sir." I said, "Why is that?" And he said, "Well, he's getting short." He said, "Well, how short are you?" And I said, "I have about 45 days left."
Yeah.
And he said, "Okay, I guess you may need to go down to the he said, "What's your job?"
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, I'm a squad leader."
Right.
And he said, "Well, do you think they'll put you back out in the field?" And I said, I imagine they will.
Yeah,
That's my job.
Right.
And so he said, I guess we can send you to the 6th Convalescent Center down at Cameron Bay. And so our barracks there was right on the beach of Cameron Bay. It was a beautiful
That's
area.
a beautiful area, I understand,
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
So that was why I've said the 187th was, that was an interesting story that I met the sergeant there.
I see, yeah. Now, do you have any lingering effects from your wounds, Leonard?
Not really from my wounds. There's always, change of weather. You get little pains and everything. But after, 47 years, you kind of get a little bit used to it. And,
Well, it was during this period, obviously, I guess, was your most fearful time in Vietnam?
Yeah, those, when you're, those are right up there with any time you're receiving fire. It's a very fearful thing, and but you're trained to do your job and not to deal with your fear by doing your job.
Right. Well, that leads us into this next question. How would you describe to young people what it's like, Leonard, to serve in a war zone? The thoughts you have of possibly being killed or wounded during a battle. Talk with us about that.
Well, those thoughts are always close to the surface of am I going to be killed? But you can't dwell on it. You have your job to do, and you continue on. So, but it's trying to describe it is very difficult for me because there is that constant fear of subconscious fear anyway, but going ahead to deal with what you have to do, and I think that's in one aspect is helps you in life because there's always difficulties that can be coming up, and you have to focus on the mission or focus on life, focus on what's the next thing to do, and so again, trying to describe what it's like is just
very difficult, isn't it? Yeah.
Very difficult. It is a continuing fearful time, and you deal with it by not thinking about, am I going to be killed?
It's not
am
constantly
I going to
on your mind, or you would go.
Right, you go crazy.
Yeah.
And like I said, I took up the thought process that they know where I am. If they get ready to shoot me, they will shoot me. And so I didn't worry about if that was going to happen. I figured if it was going to happen, it would happen, and I didn't. That was one less worry I needed to.
That's the way you dealt with it, right?
Yeah.
I know people often wonder, is it okay to be afraid or scared during combat? How would you answer that?
Yeah, I answer that with, if you're not afraid, you're either lying or you're crazy, because it is a natural reaction. It's a self-preservation thing. That fear heightens your senses. It also makes you focus on what's going on, what you need to do. And of course, in the case of the military, you have a mission to do, so you focus on that as a way of overcoming that fear, and so it's not debilitating. But I really believe that if you say you're not afraid, you're either lying or extremely
Not
crazy.
being truthful with yourself.
Right. Yeah.
You mentioned your dad earlier, but share with us what or who else prepared you to take the actions you did in combat?
Well, during high school, we had I was in junior ROTC, and we had one of our sergeants was a Korean War veteran, and I really respected him. He was very quiet and unassuming person. They accomplished his mission, and so I really respected him a lot, and I think that worked in my life at that time.
Sure.
Yeah, it was.
I know you've seen a lot of movies, war movies, since you've been out of service and during service, of course. Are war movies accurate in your opinion? I mean, you're a combat veteran. I mean, how do you feel about that?
I didn't for a long time watch war movies, and the ones like Platoon, I thought they had some politically correct agenda that they were trying to put forth that didn't really coincide with my time in Vietnam. And while they showed actions going on and shooting back and forth and stuff, is the other things of the conflict within the platoon I didn't experience. We were really watching out for each other so that we could all come home. But I think it was a TV series that I think got the closest to my feelings was a short-lived show that was called China Beach. And the emotions that TV show brought out in me were very close to what I experienced in Vietnam emotionally. I was in the hospital 2 different times, and so but I didn't see the same things that were depicted in the movies, but somewhat, the people being wounded and then not being ready to go back to combat and everything. But, it was probably the best movie. Of course, I think Patton was one that really was inspiring to me. But then when I talked with my dad about Patton and his proximity to him during World War II, I said, well, you got to take everything with a grain of salt.
Leonard, you came back from Vietnam, and I'm sure you're more mature. And you tell us about what happened after you came back. You enrolled in college. Take us from there a little bit.
Right. Well, first let me say that when I came back, I had almost a year left on my enlistment, and so I was at Fort Bragg, and I think that that year helped me transition back to stateside and everything that a lot of Vietnam veterans didn't have. They were straight almost within 2 weeks going from the jungle to going to class or something. But I did, after I got out of the Army, I went back to college. I had to go back on probation because of my earlier experience of playing tennis. And but I did, and I went to a small school for a couple of years, and they had a pre-engineering curriculum, which I had like 13 hours of calculus and 10 hours of physics with calculus. And then when I transferred to the University of Oklahoma to the architecture school, I found there the guys were taking physics for poets and to satisfy their physics things. And I'd had all this physics. I said, oh man, I did a whole lot more than I needed to. But I did, I got a Bachelor's of Science in Environmental Design from the University of Oklahoma, and then I stayed to get my Master's of Architecture in 1976. So 10 years after I graduated from high school, I got my Master's.
Now, you were married in the meantime?
I did get married right after I got out of a year after I got out of the Army, and was the girl I'd gone to high school with. She was a year behind me, and after 6 years, I left that marriage, and I didn't think of it at the time that it had any relation to my service in Vietnam, but I've come to find out here in the last couple of years that I was learning to live with PTSD without knowing that I was learning to live with PTSD. And so I remarried, and it was after I graduated from college, and I remarried and moved to Houston, Texas, and had a 25-year marriage, and
Right,
she passed away suddenly a few years ago. And so,
You have five children, or this is with your
well,
present?
my late wife and I had 3 children, and then almost 7 years ago, I remarried, and my wife is a Huntsville native, and she had 2 children. So we have 5 children.
Yeah.
That,
How did you wind up in Huntsville, Leonard?
well, I had been an architect in Dalton, Georgia, and then I moved from there to Columbus, Mississippi to be house parent at a children's home.
Right.
And after about 5 years of doing that, I learned that I just couldn't believe what people would do to their own children. And we had a lot of children that had been removed from home situations by the court system.
Mm-hmm.
But after about 5 years of doing that, I felt like I needed to get back into architecture, and spent about 3 years in Columbus doing that, and then the work just wasn't there that I needed to do, and so I looked around for several months and finally found a job in Huntsville. So I started December 1st of 1997 working in Huntsville, and been here ever since.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you in town.
Well,
appreciate
it's
it.
good to be
Appreciate all
here.
your help. Let's go back to the military just a minute. We're about to close out our interview here, but do you often wonder, would you do it all over again?
I have thought about that over the years, and there was a time that I was almost ready to rejoin the Army,
Really?
and but that was soon after I graduated, and I was having a difficult time
Sure.
with the economy finding a job,
Right.
and so I did think about it, and I've thought over the years, knowing what I know now, would I do it again?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is yes, I would. Maybe some of the details would be I would do differently, but overall, I think one of the greatest things we can do is to serve our country and make it a better place to live. And I was reminded of that a couple of years ago. I read a book that was about World War II veterans and their sons who served in Vietnam. But the author of this book was not a Vietnam veteran, but his father served in World War II. And he said shortly before his father's death, he was talking with him at the hospital, and his father looked at him and said, "The greatest thing I ever did in my life was serve in
Right,
World
serve
War
your
II.
country.
The greatest good that I could do. It was the greatest thing I ever did." And so I feel somewhat that way too, even though Vietnam was not a wildly applauded war. The service that our soldiers, Air Force, Marines, Navy, the service that they did was no less of a great sacrifice as the veterans of World War II in Korea. You know, it was carried on the tradition.
We were called upon and we served. Yeah.
Yes.
I always have this question for our people that we talk with. Leonard, our last question. What would you like for young people, especially our students, to learn and hopefully remember from your military experience?
I think the thing that I always come back to when I think about my service is that war is a terrible thing. It is something that we should be very, very, very cautious about getting into. But when we do, we should go in to fight.
Full blast.
Full
Right.
blast.
Right.
And even though war is such a terrible thing, there are times that we need to rise up against tyrants, to put them away.
Leonard, thank you for participating in our Price of Freedom interview series and allowing us to preserve your military experience for the people of our community. It's been a pleasure, sir. Thank you again for your service.
Yeah, thank you for yours.
If you'd like more information regarding this interview or any interview in our Military Heritage series, please contact the Madison County Military Heritage Commission website at mcmhc.org.